Good morning. Welcome to another session on environmental impact assessment.
So we shall continue with Unit 2, Methodologies. Course outcome, elucidate the methods of EAA with case studies. Learning outcome, discuss the methods used in EAA. Specific outcomes, explanation of the network method of EAA. So in the last live session, we have discussed two examples of how to apply this network method for a particular project, right? So we'll continue from there. So in last class we have seen about this paper production plant and its impacts on the environment, and how a network diagram is drawn illustrating the primary impacts, secondary impacts, tertiary impacts, and how they are interrelated. We have also seen this one also, a little more complicated network diagram related to dredging. So dredging, as I told, is removal of bottom material, and we have seen this, so I'm not going to explain this again. Today we will see one more example. So just in case you are not attended the last session, or you do not understand what was discussed in the last session, you will get some idea about what the network method is from this example. So this example is aerial application of herbicides. So when you consider farming, right, nowadays what they do is you know especially when you have a large area of land, many acres, it is very difficult for the farmers to go to each location and apply the pesticides and herbicides. So what they will do is they will apply the herbicides using some drones or something like that, aerial application of herbicides, because they have to cover the entire 3 acres or whatever, 5 acres or 10 acres. So it is not possible for them to go to each place and apply the herbicides or pesticides. Herbicides is nothing is equivalent to pesticides. So what happens due to this application of herbicides? So what happens is that there is a possibility of water contamination, right? Why? Because the water may either it will go into the soil or land surface and it will reach the groundwater. There's a possibility of contamination of groundwater. Or what can happen is, when there is heavy rainfall or floods, the topsoil where the herbicide was applied will get washed away, and this water which is containing the herbicides will meet the water body like lakes, rivers, ponds, and so on. So due to that, we have some effects or impacts on the environment. So there's a line missing over there. So what happens due to water herbicide contamination? There are 4 impacts. One is decreased growth of algae, phytoplankton, etc. Right. Second one is food chain contamination in water. Third one is loss of vegetation. Okay, so riparian vegetation. So take it as loss of vegetation. And the last one is non-target plant mortality. Right. So we'll go to each one of them and see what are the secondary impacts and tertiary impacts. So the primary impact is this is what happens actually. So decreased growth of algae and phytoplankton. So what happens is that the growth of algae, you know what algae is, some greenish patch of, in any even in your homes you might have seen, if you have some location where you are using lot of water, you will see that the surface over there will become like a green patch. That is growth of algae. Especially you can see in the ponds and lakes. You will see some, on the shore, that is near the shoreline. You will see that lot of greenish patches, which is nothing but algae growth. Okay, so what happens is that when that is decreased, there is decreased dissolved oxygen. When the dissolved oxygen content in the water is less, it is harmful for the aquatic species because they need some oxygen to survive. So that is taken from the water, which is in the form of dissolved oxygen. So what happens is that there's damage to fish, right? So there is damage to fish spawning. So, and that's all. They close that with that. Yeah. So going to the next one, food chain contamination in water. So this food chain contamination in water also leads to food chain contamination on the land. You know what a food chain is, right? You might have studied in EVS what is food web, what is food chain, right? Meaning plants are eaten by goats, and goats are eaten by some carnivores and so on. So it's like a food chain. So when the food chain is contaminated, meaning water in the food chain is contaminated, it also affects the land also. So they stop over there. They don't discuss anything further impacts. Loss of vegetation. Loss of vegetation. There are about a couple of impacts. Loss of vegetation leads to increase water runoff. Vegetation is lost means what? The plants are affected. So when you remove them, it is easy flow for water having the herbicides and pesticides. So there is runoff. Runoff is water that is excess water that is flowing on the surface of the land is runoff. So when there is increased runoff, it leads to increased flow. Increased runoff can also leads to increased water yield. You will get a lot of water gets collected somewhere, but the water is not really clean water because it has all these pesticides contained in them. Also, it can lead to increased erosion. Erosion meaning the topsoil gets washed away, right? And also it leads to increased sediment because the soil has a lot of sediments, so it leads to increased sediments. Increased sediments again, possibility of affecting the fish spawning in some lakes. What happens is that this will go into some lakes or ponds and gets deposited over there, so it may affect the aquatic species in that particular pond or lakes, right? Also there is one more possibility. There is debris pollution. Debris pollution means all this waste material gets dumped somewhere. Debris is nothing but waste matter, solid matter gets dumped somewhere, so that also increases sediment. The increased sediment also affects the fish production or the aquatic species. So in this way you can link all these things, right? And increased erosion, there is one line which I missed. There is increased erosion also leads to increased demand in dissolved oxygen. Why? Because your water bodies are getting decreased, more and more sediments getting deposited, so amount of water gets reduced. So this in turn affects the quantity of water. When the quantity of water is reduced, then again the dissolved oxygen content also reduces, and aquatic species again struggle to survive in such an environment, right? So this is an example of a network diagram explaining how the herbal application of pesticides and herbicides on a farmland can affect different components. And the last one which I did not discuss is non-target plant mortality. Plant mortality means the death of the plants. So the plant also die in due course of time, right? Due to this thing, because excess pesticides get dumped in some other land. Okay, it is not only that the water containing herbicides will get into the water body. It may also not meet the water body. It may get dumped somewhere else. Okay, so meaning it doesn't reach up to the water body because there may not be sufficient rains to take the water to the ponds or lakes. It may get dumped in the neighboring lands or something. So what happens is that excess pesticides get dumped over there because this has been washed to some other land where there was no need for pesticides. So if somebody grows some plants over there, they will die in due course of time. That is plant mortality. So these are the different impacts due to aerial application of herbicides or pesticides. So please understand that drawing a network diagram is not difficult. Only thing is you should know the various processes involved and how they will affect the land or water or air or human beings, plants, animals, and how to link each one of them. So if you know that, it is easy to draw a network diagram. So the limitations of this network approach, the primary limitation of the network approach is the minimal information provided on the technical aspects of impact prediction and the means for comparatively evaluating the impacts of alternatives, right? So what they are saying is that minimal information is provided on the technical aspects of impact prediction. We are only saying that this is going to get this affected, that is going to get affected. How much it is going to get affected, we have never discussed in any of the network diagrams. I have only told you that water is going to get polluted, land is going to get polluted, animals will get affected, fish is going to die. How much level of pollution is going to take place, we have not discussed anything on that. And in addition, networks can become very visually complicated. So like you might have seen the last one or the last one, there are so many arrows, so it is very difficult to know which one is related to which one, and so in that way it becomes very complicated. Networks generally consider only adverse impacts on the environment, and hence decision making in terms of cost and benefit of a development project to a region is not feasible by network analysis. We are only saying that what are the adverse impacts, or if possible maybe the positive impacts in some cases, but we don't discuss anything about the cost or benefits in terms of money, right? That is not being discussed, so that is not feasible in a network analysis. Temporal considerations are not properly accounted for, and short-term and long-term impacts are not differentiated to the extent required for an easy understanding. We are not saying anything about the short-term, long-term impacts. We are not quantifying the impact, so it is not possible to tell this is short-term and this is long-term. Meaning we can tell, but it is not differentiated in the network diagram. While networks can incorporate several alternatives into their format, the display becomes very large, and hence unweirdly when large regional plans are being considered. We have talked about some simple studies. So if you take a problem in the regional scale, then a lot of alternatives will come, and the network diagram is very complex. Further, networks are capable of presenting scientific and factual information but provide no avenue for public participation. Sorry, it is participation. So there is no, we have not discussed anything about where public participation comes and so on, right? So we'll close this session over here. Thank you.
Thus, we come to the end of this session. Thank you for your participation. Looking forward to meeting you in the next session.